In the once cheerful neighborhood of Elderwood, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the streets. The twilight air was heavy with an unsettling stillness, as if even the wind dared not disturb the ominous calm. Children had always filled the nights with laughter and mischief, but now a strange silence had fallen upon them. Just days before, they had roamed freely, their voices echoing like sweet music in the warm evening. Now, something sinister had crept in, blanketing Elderwood in an atmosphere of dread, transforming it from a playground to a graveyard of hope. Young Mia Thompson stood at her front window, a creeping unease tightening its grip around her heart. She watched as her neighbors' children gathered outside, standing stiff as statues in a perfect line across the street. Their eyes were devoid of life, staring blankly ahead, as if some unseen force had frozen them in place. A cold shiver ran down Mia's spine when she noticed that they hadn't moved for hours. It was as if they were in a trance, caught in a spell that kept them rooted to the spot. She turned away, hoping that the unsettling sight would fade from her memory, but it clung to her like a shadow, dark and stubborn. Mia's heart raced with worry. She pressed her little fingers against the cool glass, hoping to understand what was wrong. Why wouldn't they laugh and play like they used to? Was their fun just lost forever? The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but even the beauty of the colors felt tainted. The world outside her window appeared almost like a scary painting, one that made her stomach flutter with fear. The following evening, as darkness descended once again, an eerie feeling filled the air. Mia beckoned her older brother, Ethan, to join her by the window. He was usually indifferent to her fears, caught up in his own adventures and dreams. But this time, he joined her, staring out into the thickening twilight. The air felt dense, filled with an unspoken dread. Everyone felt it. It was a heavy weight resting on their hearts, an unknowing terror that laced their thoughts like a tight stitch. They whispered about the changes in their friends, the way they stared into the distance, unblinking and unresponsive, each day becoming more distant, more absent. It was strange and unsettling. Mia shuddered at the thought of her pals becoming hollow shells of themselves. Their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had once been a vibrant part of the community. She had a bright garden that burst with colors of blooming flowers, and she always waved at the children while kneeling to tend to her plants. Now, a shadow of her former self, she lay gossiping through the fence about how the children had begun to wander beyond the yards. "Something's not right," she whispered to Mia's mom one afternoon, worry etching her brow. "They leave for hours and come back different somehow." Each night, the children meandered down dimly lit streets, their footfalls a light echo upon the cracked pavement, a disturbing refrain that twisted the air around them. More troubling still were the strange reports that drifted from door to door. Whispers turned into fearful conversations in hushed tones. Those who had heard knocking on their doors in the dead of night recounted their strange experiences. Those who opened their doors were never seen again, leaving only questions that hung heavy in the air like dark clouds before a storm. That night, Mia lay awake, her limbs heavy but her mind racing. The thoughts swirled around her like a whirlpool, mixing panic and exhaustion. The chilling sound of a child's laughter echoed through the air, fragmented and haunting, but it felt wrong, as if the joy had been twisted into something sinister. She felt an unsettling shudder run through her body as it drifted near their front porch, demanding her attention with an almost magnetic pull, curiosity tinged with dread. Cautiously, she peeked through her curtains, and her heart plunged into her stomach when she spotted a small figure standing there, barely visible in the muted moonlight. It was one of her friends, Oliver, standing perfectly still, a little shadow alone in the vastness. At first, Mia felt a rush of relief, but that feeling quickly morphed into fear. Oliver's face was partially obscured by the darkness, but Mia thought she could see fleeting glimpses of something anguished lurking beneath the surface. "Help me," he whispered, his voice raspy and strange, sending chills crawling up her spine, raising the hairs at the nape of her neck. "Let me in." She held her breath, her heart thumping like a frightened rabbit, wrestling with the urge to respond. The peculiar tone of Oliver's plea sent a wave of unease through her. Something was distinctly wrong. He looked different, almost malformed in the shifting shadows. The flicker of doubt whispered that this wasn't the Oliver she had known through countless games of tag and shared crayon drawings. Just then, the door to their neighbor's house creaked open. Old Mr. Patterson, who had lived on the corner longer than anyone could remember, stepped outside, his face a mask of concern that glistened under the moonlight. "What on earth is happening, Oliver?" he asked, worry etched into the lines of his weathered brow. But the boy's silence deepened, his hollow eyes staring into the night as if he were gazing through Mr. Patterson, past him into some indistinct abyss. Suddenly, Oliver's lips curled into a chilling grin, and his outstretched hand reached for the unlocked door. Mia felt as if her heart had stopped. It raced and pounded against her ribcage like a caged bird desperate to escape. She wanted to scream, to alert Mr. Patterson, but the words tangled in her throat. The sinister atmosphere enveloped her as she watched Mr. Patterson take a step closer, curiosity overcoming his fear. But as the door swung slowly open, the familiar lines of humanity faded from Oliver's face, replaced by something grotesque and unholy that made Mia shudder. It wasn't Oliver anymore, it was something other, something dark and malformed hidden under the guise of a child. As if some malevolent force veiled in Oliver's skin had taken hold of the boy, the sudden realization froze her with dread. She swiftly backed away from the window, her mind racing with thoughts of escape and safety. It was then she felt something. A flutter of soft breath, a sensation that crawled over her like a stolen breath of cold air. Barely breathing, Mia caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows that lingered under the flickering street lamp. The snapping of twigs invaded her thoughts, each sound resounding with an ominous permanence. She barely blinked, hushed her breaths, and turned to see several figures approaching the Thompson house, their faces twisted in an agonizing mockery of glee. Panic gripped her tightly like a vice. The horrifying truth crept into her mind. It felt like the onset of a terrible storm, corrupting her thoughts with images of terror. She rushed to Ethan, shaking him awake, desperation spilling from the edges of her hasty speech. "They're coming. They're here." Panic and fear warped her words into an incoherent frenzy. They had to leave. They couldn't stay in this accursed place that teetered on the brink of something dark and sinister. But older siblings frequently indulged themselves in disbelief at younger fears. Ethan groaned, rolling over and stubbornly pulling the blankets over his head. "Mia, it's just the kids playing. Calm down, you're imagining things." His voice was sleepy and dismissive, a cocoon of comfort that meant nothing in this moment of dire need. But Mia's eyes remained wide, searching frantically to prove her brother wrong. She peered into the night, and that dread morphed into a terror that was impossibly real, pulsating with a dangerous rhythm. Outside, an invasion had begun. The children were gathered at the foot of their lawn now, eyes gleaming in the dark, shadows wrapping around them like smoke curling and rising into the night. They were no longer children, but eerie figures draped in darkness, waiting like predators, shadows with intent. Mia felt it deep within her bones, they would not relent. Her fingers trembled against the cool glass, the world outside shifting into chaos beyond her view. "I have to protect Ethan," she thought, the determination surging through her tiny body. "I can't let them get us." In a rush, she grabbed Ethan's hand, tugging him away from the cozy embrace of bedsheets that offered false comfort. "Ethan, we have to hide, they'll get us." But her brother, still in the haze of sleep and dream, merely mumbled incomprehensible words, helplessly lost to the night. Outside, the knocking had escalated, persistent and unending, like an awful drumbeat resonating in tandem with her wild heart, which felt like it might leap out of her chest. Knock, knock, knock. It felt more frantic, more desperate now, each thud a chilling call echoing through her mind, turning her insides into a pool of ice. She pressed her trembling fingers to her ears, but the knocking continued, and their voices came like sickly whispers through the gaps, calling for warm light and kindness that held nothing but darkness beneath its facade. "Let us in, we just want to play," echoed through the door, a sweet melody that twisted into a terrifying dirge. While the shadows thickened outside, Mia felt the pulse of fear propel her into action. She made her way toward the small hallway closet where her parents had stashed mementos of their youth. The air felt like it was thickening with every step, the weight of the night pressing against her shoulders. Crouching low, she took a breath and gathered her courage. The fleeting figures of the hollow children loomed on her mind, following her into that dark crevice, an essence of something sinister lurking just beyond. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the night, shattering her thoughts. The sound was followed by a frightened cry, not from outside but from inside the house. Mia felt her stomach twist, her heart racing. She moved swiftly to the closet, pulling it open and crouching inside. The closet was small, with only space for a few mementos, but it felt like her only sanctuary. From her hiding place, she could see a sliver of the living room. The door creaked again as she heard the unmistakable sound of tiny feet shuffling closer, a chorus of whispers rising to a fever pitch. "Let us in! Let us in!" They chanted in unison, their voices melded together into a single, haunting symphony, like the wind scratching against glass. Mia clamped her hands tightly over her mouth, the fear gripping her so tightly that it squeezed the air from her lungs. The voices outside pleaded, promising games and laughter, but deep down, she understood, they wanted more than just playful fun. They wanted to take something precious and irreplaceable. She heard movements within the house, something rummaging, maybe Ethan finally realizing the danger. "Mia?" came his quiet voice. "Where are you?" "Right here," she whispered back, her voice shaky, her fear too great to allow the words to come out steady. In that moment, she knew they had to think quick. "Ethan, I need you to listen to me. We can't let them in. We have to find a way to escape." "What do you mean?" he asked, rising to stand, but she could tell he was still half asleep, still lost in a fog of dreams. "Just do what I say," she pleaded, her breath hitching. Outside, the whispers grew more urgent, begging and imploring, a dark cloud that mingled with the shadows. "Let us in," the children sang again, and for the first time, their voices turned melodic and childish, like a siren's song meant to lure unsuspecting sailors to a treacherous fate. Mia's heart ached as she thought about the games she had played with them in the sun. "Those are not our friends anymore," she whispered, fighting the blurring lines between reality and the frightful train of her imagination. "They're lost." Mia knew they had to act fast. "Ethan, come on, let's barricade the door," she commanded. Ethan was still groggy, but he leaned into her urgency, shaking off sleep like a cat shaking off water. "Right," he exclaimed, and together they scrambled to find sturdy items. The couch was too heavy, but the old wooden chairs could help. They pushed them against the door, the grinding sound a bit too loud for Mia's liking, making her feel exposed to whatever lingered just beyond. But the barrier gave her a sense of control, at least for the moment. The knocking intensified, each thump matching the urgency in Mia's heart. "They will come in," she shouted, her tears pooling in her eyes. The other side felt alive with the force of will and despair, the whispered choruses blending into haunting melodies that drummed relentlessly against the barriers they crafted with their young hands. With the door finally reinforced, they huddled in the corner of the room, Mia clutching her brother's arm, both of their breaths mingling in anxious gasps. "What do we do now?" Ethan whispered, worry lines carved deeply onto his forehead. Mia closed her eyes, trying to think through the fear wrapping around her. "We can't give in. They want to trap us into something, and we can't let that happen." But as she spoke those words, the air around them shifted, alive, loaded with expectation. The shadows grew thicker, and the voices seemed to inch closer, calling for attention in dulcet tones that made her shiver anew. "Let us in. It's not what you think. We just want to play." And while mantles of darkness brushed against their barriers, Mia clutched her brother tighter still. She suddenly understood that whatever was outside, whatever had taken their friends, was not merely playing a game. It was a hunt, searching for warmth and laughter to snuff out and consume. "Let's not lose hope," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. She allowed just a sliver of courage to flicker within her heart. Light will always find a way. And in that dim light of uncertainty and fear, Mia was determined. This eerie silence had fallen over Elderwood, but she would not be swallowed by it. They would fight against the darkness, they had to. As the whispers reached a fevered pitch eerily calling for them, Mia and Ethan prepared themselves to stand together against the encroaching shadows, ready to battle not just for their home, but for their very lives. The night was far from over, and if they were to survive, they would face whatever filled the darkness together. Night had completely swallowed Elderwood, a stifling cloak of fear that seemed to envelop everything, dragging it into its depths. Mia and Ethan huddled in the small confines of their closet, cloistered away with the paintings and remnants of a life before. The world outside had transformed into a cacophony of soulless whispers, as eerie presences glided past, each seeking to break into the sanctum of safety they had created for themselves. Every soft knock against the door felt like a countdown, with each call beckoning them with a seductive promise of belonging that concealed its true, sinister essence. Mia's breath caught in her throat as she felt Ethan stir beside her. She scrutinized his face in the dim light. He looked impossibly ghostly, his eyes wide with fear and confusion, wisps of terror threading through his brows like spectral wisps of smoke. "What are they?" he finally asked, his voice a trembling whisper that mingled with the heavy atmosphere encasing them. They both knew there was no answer that could make sense of the unfolding horror. Whatever these children were had transcended earthly comprehension, leaving a thick trail of uncanny dread in their wake. "Something's wrong," Mia murmured, her voice small, barely above a flutter. "We shouldn't have opened the door when they knocked." Thoughts raced through her mind like wild animals, darting and weaving, each more terrible than the last. She could almost see the faces of her friends, their innocent and joyful smiles twisted into something grotesque, a chilling reminder of how quickly things could change. Desperate questions pushed insistently against the barrier of her thoughts. Who were they now? Was this why everyone who answered each knock never returned? The very essence of their innocence now felt tainted, like shadows creeping into the corners of their memories. In the flickering shadows of their small hiding place, the sounds outside escalated. A voice, twisted with malice, rang clear in the night. "Mia, Ethan, we only want to play." The words dripped with an unsettling sweetness that wrapped around them, squeezing a tight knot of fear in their stomachs. Mia felt the sound reverberate off the closet walls, an unwelcome invitation pushing deep into their minds like a dagger, hinting at the malevolence that surrounded them. She could not shake the feeling that something horrible had invaded their home, creeping into every corner with a sickening grip. The agony of indecision gnawed at her. They could hardly stay hidden, yet venturing out would be inviting the unholy to seep in. Time slipped into a grotesque loop as the seconds stretched into eternity, heavy and suffocating. Mia glanced at Ethan, who was shaking slightly beside her, his fingers digging into his knees. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. Just then, a blessed incident, a glimmer of hope, cut through the tension like a sharp blade. A sharp yelp split the air, breaking the unsettling cadence. Mr. Patterson was shouting, and in his voice, she could hear the panic, the terror that painted their shared reality into something far worse. The sounds of chaos erupted that evening, turning it into a demonic tale of loss and confusion. Mia felt something shatter deep within her, a realization that clawed at her heart. The darkness prowled with ravenous vengeance, and when it came for them, it would be swift and unforgiving, a darkness that knew no mercy. "Do you hear that?" Ethan's voice trembled with fear. He strained to grasp what was unraveling beyond the thin door, his eyes wide with worry. "What are they?" But before he could finish, the scuffle turned to silence, a deafening stillness that enveloped them. Mia's heart raced, pounding mercilessly against her rib cage as she strained to listen. Anxiety gripped her throat like a vice, and the reality of her surroundings sharpened into a terrifying clarity. No sounds came from outside, only a heavy stillness that signaled something dreadful had indeed befallen them. A feeling of dread permeated the air, thick and suffocating. It felt palpable, a living thing closing in on them. She could almost sense shadows creeping closer and closer, brushing against her skin like the touch of ice-cold hands, hands harboring sinful intentions that made her heart race even faster. "This isn't over," a low voice echoed from outside, its guttural timbre sending rippling waves of fear racing down her spine. Suddenly, the shadows shifted again, and the door trembled beneath the force of impact. It felt as though the arms of darkness were pushing against it, held back merely by the little barriers of wood and fear. "Let us in!" A chorus of voices shrieked, rising like a tempest. The cacophony rose to an unsettling harmony, swirling around the house like a menacing cyclone that threatened to consume everything. Just as abruptly as the sounds had started, they stopped, leaving behind an eerie silence that felt heavy, weighted with unsaid things. The quiet enveloped Mia like a fog, thick and impenetrable, and she dared to slide the closet door open just a crack. She peeked through, her heart sinking as she surveyed the horrifying sight that lay before her. The living room, once a cherished space filled with merry memories and laughter, now lay transformed into a forsaken terrain, grotesque and haunting. An empty chair sat askew where Mr. Patterson had been, the carpet marred with something dark and viscous, pooling quietly by the edges like remnants of shattered worlds. a memory of happiness now replaced with something sinister. Where is everyone? Ethan pleaded, his voice a fragile whisper edged with desperation. No reply came, and the chilling uncertainty found its way into Mia's heart, pounding there like a relentless drum. They were alone, cloistered away while an unspeakable horror mingled within their home. Whenever she dared to hope for escape, a creeping thought curled around her mind like a slithering serpent. They were becoming part of the stories where no one returned, stories that masked the true nature of the lurking darkness. As dread weighed heavily upon her, Mia pulled Ethan back into the warm cocoon of the closet, acutely aware that every moment they spent outside seemed to beckon them towards a grotesque unknown. "We can't go out there. We need to stay here," she whispered fiercely, her instincts screaming at her not to give in to the allure of the hollow creatures who called for them outside. Yet, the darkness of their new reality encroached upon them like a roaring tidal wave, each passing moment a stark reminder that this was no simple game nor a shared childhood nightmare. The children who had once called for them had transformed into grotesque shadows cast against their home, figures of malevolence that reveled in the power to steal innocent lives from the brightness of the world. Outside the closet, the draw of the past loomed ominously. Out of her peripheral vision, Mia caught sight of shapes emerging, jagged and contorted, flickering in the twilight that drained color from the world. She held Ethan close, clutching him tightly in an act of futile defense against the darkness that taunted them. The rhythm of their hearts fell slowly out of sync with the world, teetering on the edge of terror. Mia thought of their old lives, built upon bright sunshine and laughter, moments of joy that now felt like distant dreams. She wanted to remember the days spent at the park, swinging high into the air and feeling invincible, and nights spent under the stars making wishes on shooting stars they hoped would come true. But those memories started fading like pages of an old book, dusty and forgotten. It was as if the darkness wanted to consume all the joy, turning it to ash in their mouths. Suddenly, as if sharing in her despair, Ethan spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think they're gone? Maybe we could sneak out." His eyes glimmered with a mixture of fear and hope. Mia could see his bravery shining through, even in this tremulous moment. However, she knew deep down that venturing out could mean danger, drawing them closer to the source of the haunting calls that echoed through the chilly air. "No, Ethan," she replied softly, shaking her head. "We can't risk it. We have to wait. We need to be smart." She wanted nothing more than to comfort him, to make him feel safe, yet she couldn't shake the unease crawling down her spine. The darkness outside felt omnipresent, always waiting, watching as if to see how long they would hold on to hope, how long the light in them would flicker. In that moment, as the two siblings huddled close in the darkness of their closet, they whispered secrets and hopes to each other, trying to find courage in the very shadows that threatened to swallow them whole. Mia spoke of adventures they would have once the night was over, of endless summer days spent splashing in the lake, and of returning to their carefree lives. Their words floated in the air like dreams, fragile yet shimmering with a light of defiance. The minutes dragged on, each second a testament to their resolve, their determination to endure. But as the clock ticked away somewhere in the house, the oppressive quiet grew thicker, more suffocating. The fabric of their newfound reality seeped into the very walls around them, curling and twisting into grotesque shapes. Mia's heart fluttered, sensing yet another shift in the air. "Yes, let us play," the voice chimed, echoing from within the shadows. Mia felt chills race down her spine as the words slid into her ears like ice. The moment stretched painfully as she and Ethan turned toward each other, dread palpable in the small space. They could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, almost sneaking through the dark space outside. The footsteps felt almost playful, contrasting sharply with the unease settling deep within their bones. "Do you think they can hear us?" Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "What do we do if they come in here?" Mia couldn't find the words to ease his worry, her mind racing for answers that felt just out of reach. Instinctively, she squeezed his hand, channeling all her courage into that simple gesture, trying to hold on to hope amidst the rising storm. Just then, another impact against the door sent a tremor through their hiding place. The shadows outside loomed larger, as if wrapping themselves around the house, fingers stretching toward them, probing gently, seeking any weakness to find entry. Mia leaned into Ethan, wishing she could somehow shield him from what lay beyond. Time felt suspended as they waited on the edge of hope and despair, hearts racing in a shared dance against fear. The air around them crackled with energy, something was about to break. They both could feel it. Then it came. A soft, mocking lull of laughter, echoing through the silence, high-pitched and tinged with malice. "Mia, Ethan, come out to play." The voices intertwined into an eerie melody that danced in the air, chilling them to the core. It felt like they were being pulled into a dream they never wanted to be a part of, and no matter how tightly they hugged each other, the nightmares felt just too real. Mia shut her eyes tight, trying to block out the sound, imagining a world beyond the darkness. A place filled with light, where friends laughed together, and shadows had no power. "It's just a trick," she reminded herself, repeating it like a mantra, trying to latch onto the hope tethered to her heart. But deep inside, a sinking feeling whispered back, reminding her that they were caught between two worlds, their innocent childhood and the terrifying unknown that had intruded upon it. The shadows danced at the door, seeking entry as if they had been patient all along, waiting for the moment when the innocence of childhood could be crushed beneath their presence. "Stay close," Mia whispered fiercely to Ethan, determination etching itself into her voice. For the very first time, she felt a spark of bravery ignite within her that she clutched tightly. She would not let the darkness swallow them whole. They were bound together, siblings against the tide of fear. As silence fell heavily once again, the outlines of the darkness pressed closer, hovering just out of reach, their voices swirling like smoke. It was becoming harder to tell where the shadows ended and they began. The world outside felt like a hellish carnival, taunting them, filled with laughter and games that were nothing more than an eerie masquerade. A cruel joke played by unseen hands coaxing children toward their doom. But Mia and Ethan held onto each other, grounding themselves in the light of sisterhood and brotherhood, knowing that together they were stronger than fear. And as the whispers echoed in the dark, their resolve solidified, shaping their bond even tighter against the overwhelming darkness that threatened to engulf them. Outside their closet, the shadows swirled like a storm ready to break. But within their little cocoon, Mia and Ethan whispered tales of bravery, crafting their own story against the backdrop of terror. In that moment, they became the heroes of their own tale, champions of light amidst the darkness. And though the impending night threatened to take everything they knew, they clung to hope and to each other, determined not to let fear extinguish the courage that dared to shine bright in their hearts. If ignorance kept one's fear at bay, enlightenment dragged it forth, the horrors of reality clawing into every crevice of calm. Days had morphed into nights and back again, but they were rendered meaningless. The sun and moon turned into unrecognizable stages only to be pierced by engulfing screams and murmurs that coursed through the night air. Time shifted and twisted in the lethal embrace of creeping shadows, as if the hours were laughing at their confusion. Elderwood was a deserted ghost town, once a lively place filled with laughter and shouts of joy, now reduced to a realm of silence. The markers of long-gone lives diminished like fading echoes, leaving behind only shadows that slipped through the seams of reality. To Mia, it felt as though they were entrapped within a twisted carnival of darkness, where everything was bent out of shape, and the very world around them flickered with shadows that twisted grotesquely along the crumbling edges of sanity. The air was thick, almost heavy, as if it was infused with the weight of despair. Mia would often sit by the window of their small, cramped home and watch as eerie figures slid through the streets. Their existence sent chills down her spine. The knuckles of malevolent shapes rapped insistently against front doors, their cries forming a macabre chant that echoed hauntingly through the stillness of the abandoned streets. With every sound, Mia felt her heart race, bounding against her chest like a trapped creature desperate for freedom. Trapped indoors, the ghost of their former lives seemed to cling to the walls, but the shadows outside were relentless. Mia observed Ethan, her brother, as he faded into a semblance of despair, a shell of the brother she once knew. Once filled with mischief and joy, he now appeared hollow and weary, constantly gazing out the window, his eyes shadowed with uncertainty. Nights slipped by, weighted down with trembling breaths and silent tears. The cheerful echoes of bright laughter splintered away into the night, replaced by the suffocating dread of spiraling darkness. They were no longer the carefree siblings who spent their afternoons chasing butterflies and dreaming of adventures. Instead, they had become two desperate souls caught in the grip of something sinister. This was more than just a fear of monsters under the bed, it was a twisted reality that gnawed at their souls. The once vibrant colors of childhood had dimmed to muted shades. No further treaties of innocence existed. Every game or jest they once shared had turned to oblivion as they remained held captive within the walls of their home. The shadows needed to be confronted, but they felt helpless. Outside, the whispers of deception rose like a serpent, hissing sweet promises wrapped in the guise of childhood camaraderie. "Join us," echoed against the walls, a mesmerizing chorus that tugged at the fragile strings of hope still faintly flickering in their hearts. Mia could almost picture them, lost souls beckoning, their silhouettes filling the night air. "It's fun, come play." The words danced around her, enticing yet terrifying. Mia could see through the translucent veil of deceit. Shadows flickered at the brim of her mind, crawling nearer like dark vines creeping over a once bright garden. Were these truly lost children? The laughter they had once exchanged faded like droplets of water into the bright abyss of night. Now all that remained was a grotesque parody of innocence, their forms twisting endlessly like puppets strung along threads of darkness, marionettes of malice. Desperation cloaked her thoughts, drawing at any remaining vestiges of hope with promises that echoed ominously from beyond the door. "What if we could just leave?" Ethan murmured one evening, his voice shaky and uncertain. For the first time, Mia felt his resolve crack. She could sense the fraying line of his hope beginning to give way to despair. Visions of life outside bubbled up within her, pulsing with memories of sunlight and laughter, but the sinister whispers wounded that bright pulse beneath their malignant embrace. Mia clenched her fists, trying to hold onto those precious memories. "No, you can't listen to them," she urged, her voice trembling with urgency. "They'll take us too." The sudden, striking clarity in her tone echoed through their confined space, filling the hollow silence that had nestled uncomfortably among them. But that resolution began to wane as silently time ebbed away, or warped, much like their sanity. Each knock on the door surged through the splintered wood like a bass drum echoing through their hearts, relentless and predatory. The desire to play, to belong, brewed into something tangible, beckoning silently like a moth to a flame. It clawed at their awareness, gnawing at their vulnerability, the feeling of safety stripping away piece by piece until they felt as though they were walking on fragile glass. As dreams infused with darkness's subtle caress began to emerge hopelessly, visions of familiar faces twisted into sinister forms took root within Mia's mind. They danced through the shadows, beckoning and calling with ghoulish laughter that sent shivers racing down her spine. The joy that had marked their childhood was now a twisted version of horror, a sickening reminder of what lay lost between innocence and the macabre. Their laughter rang out, horrifying shrieks that spiraled higher and higher, transforming any semblance of reality into nothing but discord. Then came the night when chaos seeped through the cracks of their reality like a cold, creeping mist. It manifested into a piercing scream that echoed across the lackluster walls of their home, making every hair on Mia's arms stand on end. Mia and Ethan's eyes widened, filled with dread as they bore witness to the disturbance unfolding just outside. They could almost see it, a shadowy figure struggling against the darkness, with other shapes looming, clawing at it, wanting to pull it down into the abyss. The image painted vivid tapestries in their minds, forever frozen within the cryptic shadows that now embraced the life they once cherished. In that moment of stark horror, a cruel thought struck Mia, a thought that was as unbearable as it was enticing. Perhaps hope wasn't the answer they desperately sought. Maybe the way to survive wasn't to fight against the hollow children or unravel the mysteries lurking in the depths of darkness. Perhaps playing their game might carve out a semblance of sanity, a fleeting chance to escape. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling as a hasty secret escaped, "what if we play? What if we join them? Just until we can find a way out? They may give us back our friends." Ethan's expression flickered like a dim light in the wind. "But, Mia, that's wrong. We can't let them win." Trepidation filled his voice, the remnants of resistance lingering within him. Yet the shadows outside and their alluring whispers clawed at him, entwining their dark tendrils around his heart, barely distinguishable against the grotesque veil pulsing alive just beyond their door. Mia sighed, heart heavy. She felt the weight of the world press down on her tiny shoulders. Giving in may have been their only path left. "Just think," she tried to persuade him, "if we pretend to join them, maybe we can find a way to escape. We're smart, Ethan. Together, we can outsmart them." As the dusk closed around them, casting grotesque reflections off their shattered windows, a whisper broke free from the thick fog that surrounded them, promising warmth and comfort in reunion. The darkness peeled away their previous resolve, as they stumbled forward toward surrender, hearts pounding like wild drums. With heavy hearts and a sense of defeat settling in, Mia and Ethan prepared to step into the unknown grim play. Each moment a heartbeat closer to either embracing the twisted shame or discovering the light that might still lurk beneath the surface of gloom. The thought of their lost childhood friends clawed at them, echoing reminders of laughter ringing through sunlit days. Maybe, Ethan whispered, though uncertainty edged sharply in his tone, maybe if we play along, we can learn their secret, a way to save ourselves. Invisible cracks formed along the walls around them as shadows deepened, the air thickening, wrapping them both in an embrace that sent shivers down their spines. Together they held on to the remnants of their resolve, the shadows drawing them closer. As they prepared to open the door and step into the chilling unknown where laughter turned sour, a flicker of hope sparked but dimmed quickly amid the looming shadows. No matter what shadows loomed or what dangers lay ahead, Mia and Ethan knew deep down within their hearts, they had each other. No game could steal their bond, and perhaps that bond was the very thing that could guide them through the darkest nights. With trembling fingers, Mia reached for the doorknob that felt icy cold against her skin. The whispers grew louder, echoing a cacophony through the night. They stepped forward together, spirits entwining, ready to face whatever awaited them beyond the threshold of their crumbling sanctuary. Ready or not, the game was just beginning. The decision made, Mia and Ethan stepped out together, feeling as if they were escaping from a heavy mist that clung to them like a second skin. The world outside felt strange and eerie. Hollow laughter rang through the air, coupled with fragile sobs that seemed to float like leaves in the dark breeze. It was a weird mix of happiness and sadness that made Mia shiver. As they walked toward the front door of the place that had been their refuge, a powerful pull of dread crept over them. It wrapped around them like cold tendrils, making it harder to move forward. The whispers that had filled the space before them began to gather, swirling into something larger and darker, a pulsing mass pulling them into its grasp. It was odd how something so familiar, the simple act of opening a door, could turn into something so twisted and dreadful, leading them down a labyrinth of sorrow. When the door creaked open, the night erupted into a cacophony that felt both fantastical and horrible. Dozens of children were waiting just beyond the threshold. Their faces were not the happy, carefree faces that Mia and Ethan remembered. Instead, they were warped and twisted, as if a dark force had altered them. Their eyes glowed with a sickly light that felt more like a warning than an invitation. The smiles that stretched across their faces were wide and false, revealing jagged teeth that glimmered like obsidian in the faint light of flickering streetlights. It was an unsettling sight that made Mia's heart race with an uneasy feeling. "Welcome," one of the children called out, but the voice lacked warmth. It dripped with a chilling charm that sent a shiver down Mia's spine. The children, now mere shadows of what they once were, clambered forward, their movements quick and jerky, as if they couldn't wait to involve Mia and Ethan in their strange, twisted games. A thrill of petrifying terror shot through Mia, mixing excitement with fear as she found herself drawn forward like a moth to a flame. The air was filled with their hollow laughter, which twisted through the stillness of the night, wrapping around her thoughts and leading her down a path she didn't quite understand. Ethan, however, stayed back, his resolve flickering like a candle in a gusting wind. "Mia, we can't. We have to leave." Panic was evident in his voice, and he sounded desperate. His eyes darted around, searching for a way out, but it felt as if the darkness was closing in. Mia turned to him, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She wanted to comfort him, but her voice was fierce yet tinged with a desperate hopelessness. "It's too late," she said, feeling a wave of sorrow wash over her. In that moment, the weight of their predicament crashed down upon her, the heaviness of it like a storm gathering in the sky. The paths before them twisted and turned, laced with cherished memories and bitter truths, like a double-edged sword filled with a tempting warmth stitched together with icy hunger. Children filled the air with laughter, revealing shifting shapes that danced between magic and despair, their voices swirling around like fallen leaves in the wind. The laughter was both inviting and terrifying, and the more she listened, the more she felt herself being pulled in, as if they were all caught in a whirlwind of mystery and fear. Ethan hesitated, lost in the whirlwind of voices beyond the doorway. But Mia felt something inside her drawing her closer, urging her to join the embrace of the mesmerizing chaos. "Don't be afraid, it's just a game," she called, her voice ringing uncertainly in the air. A mirthless chuckle echoed in their midst, sending another shudder through her body. She could feel her heart beating faster as she tried to convince herself that it was all just fun. "Just come and play with us," another voice chimed in, building upon the haunting chorus that mocked her. Unable to resist any longer, Mia stepped through the threshold and into the throng, the warmth of the shadows wrapping around her like a soft blanket. It felt safe at first, but as she crossed that line, she began to feel the weight of the darkness closing in. Her heart raced, not just from fear but from the thrill of being part of something bigger, something that promised adventure. But in her heart, she also felt a warning echoing louder with each step she took. As the tide of children enveloped her, she lost sight of Ethan, and panic surged through her when she realized he had not followed. Mia tried to look back, but the silhouettes of the laughing children twisted and moved, blocking her view. "Ethan, where are you?" she shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the cacophony swirling around her. It was as if the night itself wanted to keep her there, to keep her from turning around and running back to safety. And then, in the midst of that wild laughter, she felt it. The laughter, once light and inviting, morphed into something darker, more sinister. It wrapped around her heart and pulled her deeper into the shadows. Was it laughter she heard, or were those voices crying out? It was hard to tell as everything seemed to meld together, creating a haunting tune that sent chills down her spine. The figures around her swirled and twisted, pulling her into the suffocating darkness. The warm embrace morphed into an icy grip, one that promised little respite and made her skin crawl. Then came a moment of clarity, a sudden rush of realization that pierced the veil of confusion. Deep within her, in a place she had not wanted to visit, Mia knew this wasn't just a game. It felt as though the darkness was spilling into her very soul, leading her away from what made her who she was. The memories of laughter she once held dear began to fade, spiraling away into a hollow void. She and Ethan, together they had always been a team, a steadfast pair willing to face anything. But now, they were succumbing, not to a magical game filled with wonders, but to an all-encompassing darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. The last remnants of her childhood joys slipped from her grasp like grains of sand falling through her fingers. Their identities felt lost in the whirlwind of shadows, shimmering away like tiny embers blown by a chilling wind into the void. Mia reached out, desperate to find Ethan, but all she could feel was the cold embrace of the unknown creeping closer. As her consciousness began to slip further into darkness, a sense of despair filled her heart. She could hardly remember the days of sunshine and laughter, the ones filled with promises of adventure and hope. All that echoed around her were the haunting calls to play, morphing into a lasting embrace where joy twisted into sorrow, forever tangled together. Mia could see the hollow children surrounding her like ghosts, their laughter morphing into a dark symphony that echoed through the desolate neighborhood. The world outside Elderwood continued to drift, oblivious to the secrets and stories that lingered within its shadows. Trees towered in silence, and the wind whispered through their branches, while the moon cast eerie shadows that flickered as if they had stories to tell. But as the final veil of darkness enveloped them, both Mia and Ethan realized, perhaps too late, the truth of the world they had entered. The echoing laughter of those hollow children whispered in their ears, a haunting reminder that the play was far from innocent, that the shadows craved something more, something deeper, forever hungry and forever lurking within the recesses of their hearts. Their fates hung by a thread, like marionettes lost in a grand puppet show, where every string was pulled by the darkness that had now become a part of them. With every heartbeat, the children's laughter grew louder and more demanding, urging Mia to forget what she once knew and embrace the new reality that lay beyond the veil. But deep inside, a flicker of resistance remained, reminding her of the light she had almost surrendered. For as the laughter echoed, she clung to that tiny spark, hoping against hope that it could guide her and Ethan back from the depths of shadow, back to a time where playfulness did not mean surrendering to darkness. Would they be able to find each other again, to break free from the entangling shadows? Or would they forever be lost, wandering through the corridors of despair, trapped in a twisted game from which there was no return? The hollow laughter echoed around them, but deep in her heart, Mia knew they had to try, if only for one last chance to embrace the light of hope before darkness completely took over their world.